Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I've entitled this particular podcast, How to Fix a Misunderstanding. I just watched something a little bit ago, and it was a young couple. They had met not too terribly long ago and had gone out for a couple of dates, and how it came about that things were ending a bit uncomfortably for them. Apparently, the guy, who was a little technologically challenged, had failed to either respond to the text message that was sent to him by the girlfriend, and or he also didn't do very good in the follow-up portion, showing that he was interested. So when they finally got together, when they finally reconnected for just to do a recap, she was obviously very upset, because it appears that he didn't show any interest. And so here's the scenario. A mistake happened, because it seemed to me that he was interested in her, but by virtue of him not making contact with her for whatever reason, obviously she got the impression that he wasn't interested. And she couldn't wait to tell him about it. She couldn't wait to tell him how upset she was. And he was caught a little off guard. So he's flat-footed, and didn't appear, in my view, to be able to think very fast on his feet, because what he should have done at that point is a mea culpa. A mea culpa is saying it's my fault and tried to fix it. Why? Because he appeared to me to be interested in the girl, but he didn't move fast enough, and basically that relationship went nowhere. It ended. It started out promising, but it ended. So, how to fix a misunderstanding? So, in my view, what should have happened at that point is, number one, when you have someone that's upset, you need to listen to them. Let them vent. Let them get it off their chest. It's not about trying to correct them when they're upset. It's really about giving them an opportunity to tell you how they feel. Why? Because this is what's going to help take some of the steam. This is how we're going to get to be able to de-escalate this. Now, after they've had an opportunity to share how upset they are, you can ask some facts. And this isn't where you're going to dispute how they feel, but knowing that you have a different interpretation about what happened, or what the possible breakdown in the communication would have been. Now, in this case, the guy was technologically challenged. She sent him 4 or 5 text messages. He didn't respond. He said he sent 1. Well, clearly, those of you who are listening would have said, well, why didn't he just call her and clear up the misunderstanding, or at least show interest in that way? I mean, to me, that is just the easiest thing to do. Well, they were relatively young, and for that, their mode of communication, younger people, they tend to use text messages and that sort of thing. I don't have to be the first to tell you that I don't care what technology you use, there are times when it will fail you. And short of that, you should always have a backup. Backup meaning make a phone call. Personal contact really matters. And I think that would have fixed this situation. It's obviously, to me, that would have been something that could have helped this. But in this case, what transpired was not only her being upset, but he did nothing to rectify the situation. He simply said, well, I tried to contact you, and basically left it up to her to vent and then walk away mad. What he should have done, in my honest opinion, is he should have clearly explained that, look, I am still very much interested in having a relationship with you. I am sorry. I should have done a better job of trying to keep the lines of communication open. And let me tell you why this was important. Had he done so, he would have still had a girlfriend. So let me tell you why this is important. Because number one, he allows her to express herself and not make her wrong for not doing something else. You see, the worst thing that happens in situations like this is when you kind of put upon the person that feels like they have been taken to say, well, you should have did this and you should have done that. So it's like second guessing the fact that they didn't do enough of the right things or we wouldn't have this problem. You see, that will not fix a situation. So if you are somebody that argues with someone in that regard, you will lose every time. And when we're talking about a love relationship, forget it. That is, you will lose out to somebody who's a lot more compassionate, even a little more compassionate, because this is where he should have fixed the situation, is to have owned up to the fact that I can understand why you'd be upset, because if that had been me, I would be upset also. That he should have explained how he's still interested and said, I am sorry, let us do a reset. So if you're hearing what I'm saying, it's about taking ownership of the problem, not blaming. He should take ownership of the problem, state that he's still interested, and be able to handle the fact that if she's upset, let her be upset. And after a while, she won't be as upset. You can realize that part of what was operating here is she hadn't had an opportunity to really get to him, to tell him what was going on. And if you can imagine the anxiety that's building up in people, a lot of times when people are upset, it's really all the anxiety about the situation that's really driving this. That's all the energy that's being pumped into this. It's not that they don't care about you. It's just that it's very disruptive to be able to not have that connection, to not be able to communicate with somebody you care about, and then to not know. And like I said, this was a very new relationship, and to have that kind of wobble early on, it really would have been very helpful if he had learned how to do damage control. Because first of all, every relationship is going to have upsets. Everybody's going to have an argument at some point, and they're going to happen at various levels. Some are going to be real big blowouts. Others are going to be relatively minor. And this, in my view, was a clear misunderstanding. It was a clear miscommunication. There wasn't a lack of love, but because he didn't have the ability to navigate something like this early on in the relationship, to her, that's going to be a big red flag. So he basically lost out. And as I've explained how to fix a misunderstanding like that, I'm going to encourage you to look at how you problem solve when you are in the midst of something, of an argument. Don't do the blame game, because that's age old, and that doesn't tend to fix the problem. That just tends to add fuel to the fire. And most people, I would recommend, think about what you say before you say it. Think about what you're going to say before you say it. A lot of people who are hotheads, they just speak right off the top of their head, and they say things that they don't mean, and that tends to create more problems. So think before you speak. Learn to listen. Be sure you understand the problem, and don't make it their fault. Sometimes you may just have to realize that it is your fault, yours, not theirs, yours, and take ownership of it. Really. That might be hard for some people, but if you learn how to take ownership of a problem, then you can make the first step towards fixing it. That's powerful. I'm going to take a break, and I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello, welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm John Johnson, hosting your show. How to Fix a Misunderstanding. In the first segment, I had explained that I had watched a young couple, man and a woman. They had gone out on a few dates, and somehow the breakdown of communication was that the text messaging went haywire, got crossed up. And most of us would say, okay, yeah, things happen, but why didn't he just pick up the phone and call her and fix that up? And that's exactly what ran through my mind. It didn't take me 2 seconds to figure that one out. Well, he didn't. And when they did finally get together, the conversation was, well, I did send you a text message, and he didn't receive her 6 text messages at all. That is remarkable. I mean, guess he was technologically challenged and didn't have the presence of mind to follow up by simply calling her. That is a classic mistake. I'm going to tell you, if you have communication with someone and then it just drops off, you might make a very concerted effort at calling that person. I know I have friends that say, well, if they don't call me, then I won't call them. And I'm not of that camp. I'm a person who will continue to try to make contact up until I know that they don't want to speak to me. That might sound a bit over the top, but I've always considered myself a very responsible person, and I know how technology can let you down. I know how you can make a phone call and it might not go through, or even in the case of myself, I have actually dialed the wrong number, left a voicemail message on the wrong number, and have done it multiple times, realizing later on, oops, I had the wrong number. I copied it down wrong, or something to that effect. But knowing that I am fallible, until I am reasonably sure that I'm just being ignored on purpose, then I usually make the effort. And had this guy done 1/10 of what I just talked about, he would not be desperate and dateless. So therein lies part of how to fix a misunderstanding. You need to put some effort into it. Put some effort into letting the person know that you're having a breakdown of communication with, that you are sorry, that when in fact what happened in this case, I honestly believe that he was very inept. And his way of solving the problem is letting somebody else make the first move. Well, when it comes in love relationships, waiting for somebody else to make the first move generally means you're going to wait and let somebody else move in. And you're going to be left holding nothing. And basically, that relationship is over. So don't find yourself in that kind of circumstance. It's easy enough to take responsibility. And I know this may be hard for some people, because especially when you feel like you're right all the time. Well, I can tell you, you are not. If you're a human, you make mistakes. And far be it for you to realize it on your own rather than have somebody else point it out to you. But if somebody is really coming to you with some passion about what they're saying, be willing to hear it. I mean, even if they're not yelling it at you, but just understand that in order to fix problems, sometimes you just have to go to that place of being a listener, realizing that sometimes other people are right and you're wrong. and do something about owning up to or helping heal somebody else from the hurt of, say, maybe feeling abandoned or being dismissed. And I promise you, if you make that effort, not only will you learn, but that person will learn something about you that they may not have experienced, especially in the case of this particular couple. They were brand new. Relationships are about helping you to heal. You know, you're attracted to who you're attracted to for all kinds of things. And that's a very deep conversation. But relationships give you opportunities to face situations just like this and learn from them. Now, this guy will probably learn from this in a way that he'll have to go on to someone else. And for that, well, he's missing out on dating somebody who he seemed like he was very interested in having a relationship with, but was so socially awkward that he didn't know how to repair it. So I've given you a few suggestions on how to handle situations like this. And blaming, no. That's the first one. You don't blame. Listen, yes. Listen intently, yes. Take responsibility, yes. Because when you do that, then you can offer solutions and you can fix it. That's what helps de-escalate a situation. Think about that. What I also found very interesting is one of the reasons he was attracted to this woman is because she had enough to be able to tell him how she felt. But yet when it came to that moment, he couldn't handle it. So for her, she basically was dating a man-child. When she was telling him about what went on, he basically caved and couldn't do a thing about making it better. He just really added to the problem. And the rest of us were just kind of like shaking our heads. Ooh, this is going to go bad. So don't be that one. As they say, don't be the one they say don't be like. That sounds like a mouthful, but listen to it again. Don't be the one they say don't be like. I can tell you personally, I have had that very situation happen to me, but my outcome was vastly different. I mean, I've had relationships that have been on the verge of ending because of a misunderstanding. But what I did differently is I was proactive. Proactive works. I had the capacity to listen without blame, even without blaming myself. That could be a hard one. That's not like not taking responsibility. But sometimes when you start blaming yourself, then you go through this guilt phase and then you start pouring out all of this stuff. And then the person that's upset with you starts to feel sorry for you. And then they can't even work it anymore because then they feel guilty about telling you how they feel. And it's just, I mean, you know, that's just like sliding down a mountain backwards. That's not any good either, because that's not resolve, because they're not getting over what they're trying to express when you just kind of turn it on them that way. I mean, you know what? There are people out there that use that as a tactic. Okay, but I'm thinking, no, don't do that. You can listen without blame. You can listen without guilting. You can do that. And when you have the capacity to do that, then you can rise above the things that cause misunderstandings to happen over and over and over again, because you keep doing the same dumb thing. So there again, I have made big mistakes, communication-wise, totally. But because I had the capacity to listen, I was able to rescue something that was definitely headed towards a direction I didn't want it to go. And I learned about myself. I learned about the kind of mistakes, how I am perceived, and it changed my whole way of communicating. Because I think that's something a lot of times we don't realize. We don't necessarily know how we look in someone else's eyes. And, when they're telling us how that they like us and all of that, oh, yeah, that sounds great. We're listening. But, because we're a captive audience when people are giving us compliments. But when they're saying things to us that sound like they're complaining about things, sometimes we're not such a good listener. And that's when I think you need to listen a little more intently. Remember, I said listen without judgment. Don't guilt yourself when you're hearing this stuff, because what you want to do is you want to use it as constructive criticism. Think about it. It may not sound that way when it's coming from them, because they may be saying things to you that sound hurtful because they're hurt, because they're upset. But try it on and hear it as constructive criticism. So sometimes we get caught up in how things are said to us as if we're going to listen to it or not. I say, go to the next step. Hear the message, regardless as to how it's said to you. Hear the message, learn from it, and then move forward. You don't always have to deal with that person anymore if they're just constantly rude and don't know how to act. You don't have to constantly deal with that person. But in that moment, hear the message and then move forward. And at another time, you could deal with how they message. You see, you always can't do everything at once. It's a growing, because you're growing and you give them an opportunity to grow too. I'm going to take a break and I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. How to fix a misunderstanding. You know, during the break, something else came to mind, and this is something I think a lot of people are guilty of. It's just because of the advent of cell phones, oftentimes our conversations become very public because we are in public places and we have conversations and our words tend to spill over into the earshot of other people. And that's something I want to caution you about. The misunderstandings are very private. And I say that because when it's something that's between two people, you have a perception of something, you have a breakdown of communication, the two of you should be able to work it out. And with a little bit of skill, you can have a good outcome. But if you get into this public display, which is what I call it, and you're loud on the phone and people are feeling humiliated, that doesn't really encourage people to want to come to the table and really discuss it. And I find that happens a lot. People get really public with their displeasure with someone or something, and then they want an outcome, and they do this thing out in public as opposed to being able to sit down together across a table or in an environment that's more conducive to having a one-on-one conversation. And I think that's where it should begin, is the two of them who have the breakdown to have the one-on-one conversation. And obviously there's going to be a lot of feelings one way or the other, and it may work, it may not. I'm just giving you a tip as to how, what not to do. Being loud and drawing a lot of attention to yourself tends to do just that. And you know what most people are thinking is they're looking at that person, wow, that person's making a big public display of something. And you can tell by the body language that people are upset. There's no question about it. And some people are even very vocal about they're not only being upset, but you can hear them because they're loud. See, all of that negative. That's negative. That's not going to fix a misunderstanding. That's just going to keep it going. So if you hear yourself in what I'm describing, somebody that's loud, somebody who tends to be very public, somebody that doesn't necessarily really sit down and try to solve the problem, but they just keep it festering because they keep talking about it, and to lots of other people. See, that's something that happens too, is people that don't want to solve the problems, they just tend to keep it going by just talking about it over and over with various people. It just sort of makes the circuit. And I don't think that that's somebody who's emotionally mature and wants to solve a problem. That just keeps it going. And I'm going to say this. If you're a person that does that kind of thing, you got yours is coming, because you're not learning how to solve a problem. And that's something that adults learn to do, is solve their problems, not keep them going. Because that's a very immature thing to do, is to talk about your problems in public and then expect to get a lot of sympathy. So because if somebody sympathizes with you, I think the perception is, well, you must be right because people sympathize. Well, my thought is that you're only telling half the story. So anyone that's listening to you, if they really had any objective reasoning, they would understand that they're only hearing part of it. And as a friend, they may give you a shoulder to lean on for a while, or to cry on, or to vent. And hopefully they'll tell you some things about yourself and maybe where you've gone wrong, and to actually help you go back into your conversation. Because this is what I've done. This is what I would do. And by that is you learn to solve the problem, and you realize from having those kind of interactions how bad it looks sometimes to be in that public display. So I'm going to encourage you to understand that that's not fixing a misunderstanding. That's just keeping it going. And that's like a baby crying, saying, look, come feed me, come do something for me. But you're not a baby. You're not a child. You're somebody is supposed to be thinking beyond that. And you want to build on your relationship skills. You want to build on learning, not exacerbating a problem and then expecting other people to fix it for you. I mean, there are those people out there that will try to be fixers, that'll come and try to rescue you. And there's plenty of people like that out there. But at some point, they come to realize that they're just being a rescuer, they're just being an enabler, and then they'll drop you too. So where do you go? You go the other direction. Learn from what I'm explaining to you is fixing a misunderstanding has to do with taking ownership of the problem, offering constructive solutions, not blaming, understanding the other person's point of view, and offering some compassion. That's going to get you an audience with the person that's upset with you, and possibly help to have them understand maybe they misunderstood too. That helps sort of break the ice. And when there's that sort of give and take in dealing with the problem, then you tend to have a much better outcome. It may take a little while to get back to where you were, but remember, at least you still got your relationship. And somebody isn't moving in on your time, like in the cases that I was explaining to the guy who didn't take the time to call the girlfriend after I don't know how long, because he sent one text message, she sent 6, didn't get a response, and he just kind of wondered, well, what was wrong with her? Well, he should have picked up the phone and called. So now he is desperate and dateless again, and that's his own fault. Don't be like that guy. And I really did watch this transpire. So that's just how it goes sometimes for people. And we all should hope to learn from our mistakes. I mean, you've been given a life, and learn. That's what relationships do. It provides you opportunities to do that. And the sooner you learn from it, the better. And that way you can go on to something healthier and have fun in your relationships. How to fix a misunderstanding.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmc.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.